Hello, today we are going to practice some relative dating using the laws that we learned about in our lecture. So let's review. The law of superposition states that the rock layers are going to be established on older rock layers. So as we go down in a rock sample, we find the older rock samples are towards the bottom, and then the younger ones are found at the top. So this is because the youngest layer is becoming established on a layer that's already there, therefore older than it. So know that the deeper you go, older the sample is, and then all the way to the youngest on the top. The other law, called the cross-cutting law, states that any feature that cuts across a sequence of rocks is younger than everything it cuts. So here we see a bunch of rock layers established, and then these fractures in rock layers. Here we see a little dike. This is what these are called, dikes, that cut through these already established rock layers. So that means that this portion of the geosphere is younger than all the layers that it's cutting through. So what I have here shaded in green would be younger than the layers it is cutting through. The other law we want to review is the law of inclusion. And the law of inclusion describes how any rock or fragment that's included inside of another rock is older than the rock in which it is included. So the wording of that's kind of confusing, but basically if you see these little pieces, these are inclusions inside a rock layer, that means that those little pieces, those inclusions or fragments, are older than the layer in which you find them in. So these inclusions B in rock layer C are older than rock layer C. So let's take these laws and see if we can use these to relatively date the rock layers in these example problems. So let's take a look at number one up here. We have three different rock layers, and we can see that we have this rock layer B kind of cutting through samples A and C. So we know because it's cutting through the other ones, we know that this is the youngest layer. If it is cutting through a layer, we know that those other layers are already established. So looking at these laws, we can see that we're applying the law of cross-cutting to conclude that layer B is the youngest. So that one's the most important. The other law that we're going to want to use is the law of inclusion. Notice how we have these inclusions here, which appear to be of the same rock material as sample C up here. So if we see these inclusions and they're in layer A, by referencing the law of inclusion, we can conclude that these fragments we're finding inside the other layer is older. So layer C must be the oldest because those inclusions are found in layer A. So A must be of an age in between B and C. So we are using we're using several laws here, but the one that is most important would be the cross-cutting, and then the one that's next important would be the inclusion, law of inclusion. So next, let's take a look at number two. Number two, we have several different rock layers, and we can see that they have been horizontally distributed on top of each other, but we see that there is this layer that cuts through another layer, but let's start with what's on top. We know what's on top is our youngest, layer A, and then we would have next would be D, and then C. And after that, we get into some other funky stuff. where we have this layer of rock labeled B that is cutting through this already established layer E. So since it is cutting through layer E, we know that it must be younger than the layer in which it cuts through. So we would say that B is younger than layer E, which we're going to say is the oldest. So we used the law of superposition, but what was really important towards the end there was the law of cross-cutting. So let's reference the cross-cutting law as being the one that was super important, especially once we got down to here. The law of superposition is also important. So it's debatable, but for your answer, let's write cross-cutting. Let's do number 3. This is a layer that's pretty straightforward. We have some simple rock layers, B, D, E, and C, and here we have this layer of rock that is cutting through all of these layers. So since it is cutting through all these established layers, we can say that that is the youngest rock layer, A, because of the law of cross-cutting. If it's cutting through layers, it must be younger than the layers it's cutting through. So A would be our youngest, and then we can use the law of superposition to date all of the other rocks. So from top to bottom, we have the youngest, all the way down to the oldest. So let's just go down the list. A would be the youngest, then we would have B, D, E, and then C would be our oldest. Okay? Rewatch this video, make sure you get the correct answers on the form. Have fun.